Hello and welcome to a new episode of the devlog of Runes of Aereal. Today I am going to present you the new looting system. So I've done a little overhaul of the looting system. I'll present it to you using the sandbox and you'll see how it works now. So I've deliberately added 2 enemies with little health, so let's kill them off. That one and 7 damage. Okay, victory. And then you'll see that we have now the option to choose cards, which was not there before. You have the option to choose a card, and instead of selecting everything, you have to choose. So you can collect the mushroom, connect the card, or connect coins. So let's collect the card, and now for the other one, you can select 2 different spell books or another card, like that. So this is the looting system, where you have the option to choose something, and you also have the option to choose nothing if you select nothing. So this is done using the so if I go to cards here, no, not here, I should have somewhere around here. Create card, it's a function. So whenever we create a card, we now have an extra parameter called card creation mode, which is a standard card creation mode, or a temporary card, or a loot card. So if it's a loot card, we move it to the loot layer, and we also choose loot as the current deck to distinguish if it is a card which is to be looted, or a card which is somewhere on the deck or in our hand. So this is to accommodate that. And let's go to the loot event sheet here, where in the show loot we now have the option. We see here, okay, if the generated loot is of loot type coin, so we just introduced loot types here, so it can be a coin, a scroll, a card, an artifact, a crafting, or a spell book. And then what happens is when we generate loot, there's a different function called generate loot. When we generate loot, we have something called where is it? So for each enemy we create a loot drop. For each loot drop, we will then create this loot drop object, and in that loot drop we will first determine using a probability table called loot number of items underscore and then a difficulty level. So depending on the difficulty level, we'll have more or less number of items to be looted, and then we use that number of loot items in a loop. So we will generate 1 to 4 different loot types, and then we determine which type is to be generated. So it can be 2 cards, 1 card, a card and an artifact, so any combination is possible really. And depending on the loot type, we just create, we set a new probability table. So there's 3 probability tables here, one to determine the number of items, one to determine the type which were to be looted, and then from within that type, which object type is to be generated. So that's what we do here. And in the show loot, we're just going to show what's there. That's it. So depending on what type of loot type scroll, loot type artifact, and stuff like that, other things are to be done. And then when we collect, we now collect whatever is highlighted. So there is a new object type called the loot highlighter. That's the white thing behind the loot you saw. Whenever that something is highlighted, then we pick that instance, and in that instance there is an instance variable called loot UID. So attached to that highlighter there is the loot that can be looted from that highlighter. So we select that one, and then we see from that loot what is the loot type. So if it's if it's coins, we add some coins. If it's an artifact, we add the artifact to that inventory, etc., etc. So that's how this new looting functionality works. So that's the main thing here in this update. Another thing I did, which is a bit of a programmatic overhaul really, is here in the AI function. What we did is I created a function called load probability table, and the load probability table will now, instead of it used to be so that there was a pretty long function creating probability tables and adding entries to those probability tables with like a few hundred actions. So right now I chose to go for a solution where the probabilities are in a JSON file. And you'll see there's a probability table called attack with two possible values, attack and defend. Defend with attack and defend, balanced with attack and defend, loot number of items 1, so the number of items in easy mode, in intermediate mode, in hard mode, you can see here. So these are the probability tables, and these are the entries in the probability tables with their respective value. So the advantage of doing it this way is that we have one central place to manage the different probabilities, and the second advantage here is that we can now read those probability tables with a lot more reduced number of code. Let's see here, we request the probability tables, and then for every entry in the probability tables we create the probability table, and then for every entry we add that probability table using the item key and the item value here. So the only thing we do here in the create probability tables, instead of creating probability tables and entries manually, we just call that function X number of times. So every time we add a new probability table to the game, we just need to add one function call here to read that from the probabilities JSON file. So the last advantage of this is that in the future, when the game is released, for example, there is an option to, for example, load this into some web location where the game will read that JSON file from a certain web location on my website, for example, so that once the game is live, I can adjust the probabilities and of what is happening in the game for every user using it from that central probabilities file. Actually, right now it's just loading the file from the internal JSON file, but I can easily change that to load it from some website. This is a great functionality to later adjust the quality of the game and the balance of the game using the probability tables if I see that for some reason some balancing of the game in certain circumstances is a bit off. So that's the last advantage of doing it this way. So that's it. Complete loot overhaul. Was quite some work to do, and I'm quite satisfied about this code overhaul as well, to make it very much more compact and very much more handleable in terms of probability tables. So that's it. As always, please like, please subscribe, and see you next time.